things that you may not be able to see at first glance. So when she came to the WNBA, just a lack of preparedness by the commissioner, lack of marketing. She really shines a light on it. And then the lack of travel. Then the women's Olympic movement was absurd, not putting her on the team. Christine Brennan wrote about that in her book. And then we've also noticed that the players were very petty, although I think they're getting over it. But Caitlin Clark has really shined a light on how bad the officiating is. It's not bad calls, it's no calls.
This, Colin Cowherd just absolutely destroyed Cathy Engelbert and the WNBA leadership like never before. And honestly, it was long overdue. The mainstream sports media hosts didn't hold back when talking about Caitlin Clark's recurring injuries and how the league has completely failed to protect their biggest star. His takedown was absolutely brutal and completely accurate. But before we get into Colin's epic destruction of Cathy Engelbert, let me know in the comments. Do you think mainstream media personalities like Cowherd calling out the WNBA will finally force some changes?
He does not. He always kind of calls out fans for always trying to blame refs and complain about them. Like he has always supported that side and has talked about it's really hard to officiate and there's so many more video angles now that of course you're going to see bad calls and whatnot, that it is what it is. And so the fact that he's pretty much saying like this is awful, that's massive.
Well, folks, we finally have a mainstream sports media personality with the guts to say what everyone with functioning brain cells has been thinking all season long. Colin Cowherd just put Cathy Engelbert and the entire WNBA leadership on blast. And honestly, it was one of the most satisfying takedowns I've seen in years. For those who don't know Colin Cowherd, this is not a guy who usually goes after referees or league officials. He's typically the guy defending officiating and telling fans to stop complaining about calls. So when someone like Cowherd comes out swinging at WNBA leadership and officiating, things have reached a breaking point. Colin basically laid out a complete indictment of how Cathy Engelbert and her team have managed this league, and he used Caitlin Clark's injury situation as the perfect example of their incompetence. He didn't just criticize individual decisions. He exposed the systemic failures that have been obvious to anyone paying attention.
As I was watching the All-Star game, I was on another TV, I was watching Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. So I've compared her to Michael Jordan, not stylistically, obviously, but in merchandise sales, kind of a dynastic TV rating changer. And in year one, like you just were like, wow, nobody plays like that. And then in year two, Michael Jordan got hurt. And then in year two for Caitlin Clark, she's getting banged up and hurt. Why did MJ always get hurt early? Because they were tackling him. Nobody knew how to stop him. And the WNBA officiating is just changed. Like it was always a physical league. Now it's insane. So last night she gets hurt again and she's in a shooting slump. And I think a lot of it is she's banged up in year two, like Michael Jordan. And Michael was fighting to come back and she's fighting to come back and she re-injured a groin. So she's still scoring and still a team leader and assists, but she's been banged up. And, by the way, her brother went to social media last night. No lies told. Colin Clark said, make no mistake, this is on the reffing. And even Stephanie White, Fever coach, has noticed it.
The comparison he made between Caitlin Clark and Michael Jordan was absolutely perfect. He pointed out that in Jordan's second year, he kept getting hurt because teams were basically tackling him since they couldn't stop him any other way. Sound familiar? That's exactly what's happening to Caitlin Clark right now. But here's where Cowherd really drove the knife in. He pointed out that the WNBA has had decades to figure this stuff out, and they're still making the same amateur mistakes. The NBA learned how to protect their stars. The NFL learned how to protect their stars. Meanwhile, the WNBA is still letting players get knee in the stomach with no consequences.
The officiating is horrible. Listen to this. There's only 179 active players in the league. Players have already suffered 141 injuries since opening day. It's like one per player. There have been 57 head and neck injuries in the past 2.5 seasons. They just don't call anything. They don't call anything. And like the NBA, they allow more physical play in the playoffs. But this is a regular season. You want your stars in the WNBA, you want them healthy for the All-Star game. You want them healthy for the playoffs. You don't want them banged up now.
The statistics, Colin, throughout were absolutely devastating for Cathy Engelbert's leadership. 141 injuries among just 179 active players since opening day. That's almost one injury per player in a league that's only played about half their games. That's not normal wear and tear. That's a systematic failure of player protection. 57 head and neck injuries in the past 2.5 seasons. Head and neck injuries. We're not talking about twisted ankles here. We're talking about the kind of injuries that can end careers or worse. And what's Cathy Engelbert's response to this crisis? Crickets. Absolute silence. Colin's metaphor about Caitlin Clark being like a black light in a hotel room was absolutely perfect. She's exposing all the disgusting problems that have been hidden in the WNBA for years. The terrible officiating, the amateur level, marketing, the second-rate travel, accommodations, the petty player drama. All of it is being exposed because they finally have someone worth watching.
So insane. And I disagree with what Colin said, though, where he's like, oh, the pettiness is no longer there. No, it is. No, it is. And this is where the WNBA is so infuriating. It's so ridiculous. Because now Caitlin Clark is not going to be in the three-point contest or the All-Star game. Nobody's going to care about All-Star weekend now. They're going to still try to pretend like it's this big thing and, oh, the views were so high, there's that, because of what Caitlin Clark has already brought into the WNBA. Yes, that's why. That's why. They'll try to pretend and they'll try to sell it as, no, everything's just great, regardless of Caitlin Clark, but it is this is a massive loss.
And let's talk about those officiating standards that Colin highlighted. WNBA. Referees make as little as $180 per game. College referees make more than that. You get what you pay for, and apparently the WNBA thinks their product is worth discount officiating. This is where Cathy Engelbert's leadership failures become most obvious. You can't run a professional sports league with amateur standards and expect professional results. But that's exactly what she's been trying to do. And Caitlin Clark's injury problems are exposing how badly that approach is failing. Colin also called out the Olympic team decision, which was another massive failure of leadership that traces back to the WNBA's influence. They had the biggest name in women's basketball, someone who could have brought massive global attention to the sport, and they left her off the team. Out of petty politics. The travel situation that Colin mentioned is another perfect example of how Cathy Engelbert has failed to elevate this league to professional standards. While NBA players are flying on private jets, WNBA players are still dealing with commercial flights and amateur-level accommodations. But the most damaging part of Colin's criticism was when he talked about how the league has no playbook for handling a superstar. Hollywood knows how to handle stars, he said. But the WNBA is still figuring it out. That's a leadership failure at the highest level. Think about what that means. The WNBA has been around for decades, and they still don't know how to properly market and protect their biggest assets. That's not a learning curve. That's institutional incompetence. And it starts with Cathy Engelbert. The injury pattern that Colin highlighted is particularly damaging to Engelbert's reputation. Caitlin Clark hasn't been able to play 5 consecutive full games all season. That's not bad luck. That's a systematic failure to protect your most valuable player. Colin's comparison to the Chicago Bulls handling of Derrick Rose was especially brutal because everyone remembers how that organization was criticized for rushing players back from injuries and not properly managing their health. The WNBA is heading down the same path with Caitlin Clark. What makes Cowherd's criticism so powerful is that he's not some random internet commentator. He's a mainstream sports media personality with a huge platform, and he's calling out the WNBA's leadership failures on national television. That's the kind of pressure that can actually force changes. The fact that he specifically called out the league's inability to market properly is particularly damning for Cathy Engelbert. Marketing is literally one of the basic functions of a sports commissioner, and she's failed spectacularly at it despite having the biggest marketing opportunity in women's sports history. Colin pointed out that Caitlin Clark is a dynastic TV rating changer and compared her impact to Michael Jordan. When you have that kind of generational talent, a competent commissioner figures out how to build the entire league around protecting and promoting that player. Instead, Cathy Engelbert has let her get beat up every game. The officiating criticism that Colin laid out is probably the most damaging to Engelbert's leadership because it's so easily fixable. You want better officiating, pay referees more. You want more consistent calls, implement better training programs. You want to protect star players, instruct officials to actually call fouls when they get targeted. None of this requires revolutionary thinking or massive structural changes. It just requires basic competent leadership, which is apparently too much to ask from the current WNBA administration. Colin's point about the league being unprepared for Caitlin Clark's arrival is particularly embarrassing for Cathy Engelbert. Everyone knew she was coming. Everyone knew she was special. Everyone knew she would bring unprecedented attention to the league. And they still weren't ready. The fact that Colin had to point out that star guards like Kelsey Plum are getting scratched up and beaten with minimal foul calls shows how systemic this problem is. It's not just about Caitlin Clark. The entire officiating standard is amateur level. When Cowherd says the WNBA is insane for how they let players get abused, that's not hyperbole. That's an accurate description of a league that has completely failed to establish professional standards of player protection. The timing of Colin's criticism couldn't be worse for Cathy Engelbert either. This comes right after Caitlin Clark had to miss the All-Star game due to injury, which represents a massive financial loss for the league. Their biggest draw, their main marketing asset sitting out, their showcase event because they couldn't keep her healthy. Colin's observation that nobody quite knows how to defend her, so they're just letting players get physical is exactly right. Instead of expecting defenders to develop actual basketball skills, the league is allowing them to resort to football tactics. The comparison to how the Pistons used to beat up Michael Jordan in the playoffs is perfect. Except the WNBA is allowing this level of physicality during the regular season. Even the NBA learned that you have to protect your stars during the regular season to keep them healthy for the playoffs. What makes Colin's criticism so effective is that he's not asking for special treatment for Caitlin Clark. He's asking for basic professional standards that every other major sports league has already figured out. The fact that the WNBA hasn't is a direct indictment of Cathy Engelbert's leadership. The stress test analogy that Colin used is perfect. Caitlin Clark's presence is like running a stress test. on the WNBA systems, and they're all failing. The officiating is failing, the marketing is failing, the player protection is failing, and the leadership is failing. Colin's point about the league having rolling blackouts is brutal but accurate. Every time there's a test of the WNBA's professionalism, something breaks down. Whether it's officiating, marketing, travel, or basic player safety, they can't seem to handle success. The fact that mainstream media personalities are now openly criticizing Cathy Engelbert's leadership should be a wake-up call for the league. When you've lost Colin Cowherd, who typically